All right, thank you everyone for joining us for Great Speech Group B. These are the final 5 speeches of the event. We're going to have some more fantastic speakers. I want to remind everyone once again to keep your mask on, avoid moving furniture, especially in your war rooms. Please refrain from moving furniture into your war rooms that was not there originally. Just keep everything as it was. So I'm going to go ahead and announce 2 houses at a time. So I'll have one house that is performing and one house that is on deck over in this area by the doors. The first is going to be the house of Corey Ten Boom, and on deck we're going to have the house of C.S. Lewis. Thank you.
Members of Congress, I, Thomas O'Neill, the Honorable Justice and Speaker of the House, welcome you tonight. February 21st, 1985, I also welcome Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who is granted the floor at this joint meeting of Congress. Thatcher is the first Prime Minister to address our Congress since Winston Churchill in 1952. Together, President Reagan and she endorsed the administration of reconciled strength within the Western Allies. President Reagan and Thatcher, as heads of their respective conservative parties, maintain a close bond, strengthening our Anglo-American alliance at a time when international order, with the desolation of the Soviet Union and communism, and the reunification of Germany is undergoing profound change and reorganization of power. They are attempting to reconcile peace between our nations and countries outside of Western powers. It is my great privilege, I deem it a high honor and personal pleasure, to present to you the Right Honorable Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, distinguished members of Congress. On this, one of the most moving occasions of my life, my first words must be to say, thank you for granting me this rare privilege of addressing a joint meeting of the United States Congress. My thoughts turn to 3 earlier occasions when a British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, has been honored by a call to address both houses. Those 3 occasions deserve to be recalled because they serve as maps along a dark road which our people trod together, and they remind us what an extraordinary period of history the world has passed through between that time and ours. And they tell us what later generations in both our countries sometimes find hard to grasp, why past associations bind us so closely. Winston Churchill's vision of a union of mind and purpose between the English-speaking peoples was to form the mainspring of the West. No one of my generation can forget that America has been the principal architect of a peace in Europe which has lasted 40 years. Given the shield of the United States, we have been granted the opportunity to build a concept of Europe beyond the dreams of our fathers, a Europe which seemed unattainable amid the mud and slaughter of the First World War and the suffering and sacrifice of the Second. Of course, in the years which separate us from the time when Winston Churchill last spoke to Congress, there have been disappointments as well as hopes fulfilled. It may seem to some of you that by comparison with the risk and sacrifice which America has borne through 4 decades, and the courage with which you have shouldered unwanted burdens, Europe has not fully matched your expectations. For the first 40 years of this century, there were 7 great powers: the United States, Great Britain, Germany, France, Russia, Japan, and Italy. Of those 7, 2 now tower over the rest: the United States and the Soviet Union. To that swift and historic change, Europe, a Europe of many different histories and many different nations, has had to find a response. It has not been an easy passage to blend this conflux of nationalism, patriotism, sovereignty into a European community. Yet I think that our children and grandchildren may see this period, these birth pangs of a new Europe, more clearly than we do now. They will see it as a visionary chapter in the creation of Europe, able to share the load alongside you. Do not doubt the firmness of our resolve in this march towards this goal, but do not underestimate what we already do. It is fashionable for some commentators to speak of the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, as though they were somehow of equal worth and equal significance. Mr. Speaker, that is a travesty of the truth. We do not aim at domination, at hegemony in any part of the world. Even against those who oppose and who would destroy our ideas, we plot no aggression. Of course, we are ready to fight the battle of ideas with all the vigor at our command, but we do not try to impose our system on others. We do not believe that force should be the final arbiter in human affairs. In talking to the Soviet Union, we find great difficulty in getting this message across. They judge us by their ambitions. They cannot conceive of a powerful nation not using its power for expansion or subversion, and yet they should remember that when, after the last war, the United States had a monopoly of nuclear weapons, she never once exploited her superiority. No country ever used such great power more responsibly or with such restraint. I wonder what would have befallen us in Western Europe and Great Britain if that monopoly had been in Soviet hands. Mr. Speaker, wars are not caused by the buildup of weapons. They are caused when an aggressor believes he can achieve his objectives at an acceptable price. The War of 1939 was not caused by an arms race. It sprang from a tyrant's belief that other countries lacked the means and the will to resist him. Remember Bismarck's phrase? Do I want war? Of course not. I want victory. Mr. Speaker, despite our differences with the Soviet Union, we have to talk with them. For we have one overriding interest in common, that never again should there be a conflict between our peoples. We hope too that we can achieve security with far fewer weapons than we have today and at lower cost. And thanks to the skillful diplomacy of Secretary Schultz, negotiations on arms control open in Geneva on the 12th of March. They will be of immense importance to millions. They will be intricate, complex, and demanding. We should not expect too much too soon. We must recognize that we have faced a Soviet political offense designed to sow differences among us, calculated to create infirmity of purpose, to impair resolve, and even to arouse fear in the hearts of our people. Hope is such a precious commodity in the world today, but some attempted to buy it at too high a price. We shall have to resist the muddled arguments of those who have been induced to believe that Russia's intentions are benign and that ours are suspect, or who would have us simply give up our defenses in the hope that where we led, others would follow. As we learned cruelly in the 1930s, from good intentions can come tragic results. Let us be under no illusions. It is our strength and not their goodwill that has brought the Soviet Union to the negotiating table at Geneva. Mr. Speaker, we know that our alliance, if it holds firm, cannot be defeated, but it could be outflanked. It is among the unfree and the underfed that subversion takes root. As Ethiopia demonstrated, those people get precious little help from the Soviet Union and its allies. The weapons which they pour in bring neither help nor hope to the hungry. It is the West which heard their cries. It is the West which responded massively to the heart-rending starvation in Africa. It is the West which has made a unique contribution to the uplifting of hundreds of millions of people from poverty, illiteracy, and disease. But the problems of the Third World are not only those of famine. They face also a mounting burden of debt, falling prices for primary products, protectionism by the industrialized countries. Some of the remedies are in the hands of the developing countries themselves. They can open their markets to productive investment. They can pursue responsible policies of economic adjustment. We should respect the courage and resolve with which so many of them have tackled their special problems, but we also have a duty to help. How can we help? By keeping our markets open to them. Protectionism is a danger to all our trading partnerships, and for many countries, trade is even more important than aid. The developing countries need our markets as we need theirs, and we cannot preach economic adjustment to them and refuse to practice it at home. We in Europe have watched with admiration the burgeoning of this mighty American economy. America is by far the largest direct investor in Britain, and I am delighted to say that Britain is the largest direct investor in the United States. The British economy has an underlying strength, and like you, we use our strength and resolve to carry out our duties to our allies and to the wider world. Free, strong, democratic societies will not be driven by gunmen to abandon freedom or democracy. The problems of the Middle East will not be solved by the cold-blooded murder of the American servicemen in Lebanon, nor will the problems of Northern Ireland be solved by the assassin's gun or bomb. Distinguished members of the Congress, our two countries have a common heritage as well as a common language. It is no mere figure of speech to say that many of your most enduring traditions, representative government, habeas corpus, trial by jury, a system of constitutional checks and balances, stem from our own small islands. But they are as much your lawful inheritance as they are ours. You did not borrow these traditions, you took them with you, because they were already your own. I cannot conclude this address without recalling words made immortal by your great President Abraham Lincoln in his second inaugural address, when he looked beyond an age when men fought and strove towards a more peaceful future. With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right that God gives us, to see the right, let us strive on, to finish the work we are in, to do all which may achieve and share us a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Members of Congress, may our two kindred nations go forward together, sharing Lincoln's vision, firm of purpose, strong in faith, warm of heart, as we approach the third millennium of the Christian era. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Friendly reminder to those of you who are attending to get an early credit. Please make sure if you're attending in person that you are you checking with either with your house liaison or with a member of the committee before you leave this room. If you're attending online, thank you for doing so. Our academics coordinator is going to send a Google form into the Zoom chat, which you can then fill out with whatever answers you want to prove that you watched the duration of speeches. With that, we have the House of Lewis next, and then on deck we will have the House of Susan B. Anthony. Thank you.
Thank you. Dearest gentlemen of the committee, it is a great honor to introduce my esteemed and respected law partner, Mr. Lincoln, to a group of gentlemen such as yourself. You have chosen a great man for a nomination to this position in this party. This is a time in which, instead of moral courage, men have chosen to speak and act with politically safe areas and words. This type of man is not my partner. My partner is a man of moral courage and not afraid of political consequence. There can be no joy or tranquility in our union of states if we are not reconciled with our brothers of those states that uphold this practice of slavery. This is why we must stand together and not be afraid of political consequence. This is why we must be bold and stand with more upstanding with our brothers of the North and the South. Mr. President, if there is no objection, it is my utmost and proudest honor to welcome our party's nominee to the Senate, Mr. Abraham Lincoln, to the stage.
Mr. President and gentlemen of the convention, if we could first know where we are and whither we are tending, we could then better judge what to do and how to do it. We are now into the 5th year since the policy was initiated with the confident promise of putting an end to slavery agitation. Under the operation of that policy, that agitation has not only not ceased, but has constantly augmented. It will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. I do expect it will cease to be divided. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it, or its advocates will push it forward till it shall become lawful in all states, North as well as the South. Have we no tendency to the latter condition? The new year of 1854 found slavery excluded from more than half the states and from most of the national territory by congressional prohibition. 4 days later commenced the struggle, which ended in repealing that constitutional prohibition. This opened all the national territory to slavery. It was the first point gained. But so far, Congress only had acted to save the points already gained and give chance for more. While the Nebraska bill was passing through Congress, a law case involving the question of an African American's freedom was passing through the U.S. Circuit Court for the District of Missouri. And both Nebraska bill and lawsuit were brought to a decision in the same month. The man's name was Dred Scott. Before the next presidential election, the law case came to the Supreme Court, but the decision was deferred until after the election. Mr. Buchanan was elected, and the endorsement, such as it was, secured. That was the second point gained. The endorsement, however, fell short of a clear popular majority by 400,000 votes. The outgoing president echoed back upon the people the weight and authority of the endorsement. The presidential inauguration came, and still no decision of the court, but the incoming president exhorted the people to abide by the forthcoming decision, whatever might be. Then came the decision. The author of the Nebraska bill finds occasion to make a speech at this Capitol endorsing the Dred Scott decision. The new president, too, seizes the early occasion to endorse that decision and to express his astonishment that any different view had ever been entertained. At length, a squabble springs up between the president and the author of the Nebraska bill. The latter declares that all he wants is a fair vote for the people, and that he cares not whether slavery be voted up or voted down. The several points of the Dred Scott decision, in connection with Senator Douglas's care not policy, constitute the piece of machinery in its present state of advancement. This was the third point gained. The working points of that machinery are: first, that no slave imported as such from Africa and no descendant of such slave can ever be a citizen of any state. Secondly, subject to the Constitution, neither Congress nor a territorial legislator can exclude slavery from any United States territory. Thirdly, that whether holding an African American in actual slavery in a free state makes him free, the United States courts will not decide, but will leave to be decided by the courts of any slave state the slave may be forced into. Auxiliary to all this, the Nebraska doctrine is to educate and mold public opinion, to not care whether slavery is voted down or up. This shows exactly where we now are and whither we are tending. The people were left to be left perfectly free, subject only to the Constitution. Plainly enough, now it was exactly fitted niche for the Dred Scott decision to come in and declare the perfect freedom of the people to be just no freedom at all. Why was the amendment expressly declaring the right of the people to exclude slavery voted down? Plainly enough, now, the adoption of it would have spoiled the Dred Scott decision. Why was the court decision held up? Why even a senator's opinion withheld till after the presidential election? The speaking out then would have damaged the perfectly free argument upon which the election was to be carried. Why the outgoing president's felicitation on the endorsement? Why the incoming president's advance exhortation in favor of the decision? And why the hasty after endorsements of the decision by the president and others? We cannot absolutely know that all these are the result of preconcert. But when we see a lot of frame timbers, which we know have been gotten out at different times and places by different workmen, and when we see these timbers joined together and see they exactly make the frame of a house, all the tenons and mortises exactly fitting, in such a case, we find it impossible not to believe that the workmen all understood one another from the beginning, and all worked upon a common plan drawn up before the first link was struck. Well, the opinion of the court in the Dred Scott case expressly declares that the Constitution neither permits Congress nor a territorial legislator to exclude slavery from any United States territory. They all omit to declare whether or not the same Constitution permits a state to exclude it. Possibly, this is a mere omission, but who can be quite sure? The nearest approach to the point of declaring the power of a state over slavery is made by Judge Nelson. On one occasion, his exact language is, except in cases where the power is restrained by the Constitution, the law of the state is supreme over the subject of slavery within its jurisdiction. In what cases the power of the states is so restrained by the Constitution is left an open question, as the restraint on the power of the territories was left open in the Nebraska Act. Put that and that together, and we have another nice little niche, which we may, ere long, see filled with another Supreme Court decision declaring that the Constitution of the United States does not permit a state to exclude slavery from its limits. Such a decision is all that slavery lacks, that being alike lawful in all the states. Welcome or unwelcome, such decision is probably coming, and will soon be upon us, unless the power of the present political dynasty shall be met and overthrown. We shall lie down pleasantly dreaming that the people of Missouri are on the verge of making their state free, and we shall awake to the reality instead that the Supreme Court has made Illinois a slave state. There are those who whisper softly that Senator Douglas is the aptest instrument there is. They wish to infer all that he has now little quarrel with the present head of the dynasty, that he has regularly voted with us. They remind us that he is a great man, and that the largest of us are very small ones. Let this be granted. But a living dog is better than a dead lion. How can he oppose the advances of slavery? His avoided mission is impressing the public heart to care nothing about it. For years he has labored to prove it a sacred right of white men to take African American slaves into the new territories. He has done all in his power to reduce the whole question of slavery to one of mere rights of property. And as such, how can he oppose the foreign slave trade? Senator Douglas holds the man may rightfully be wiser today than he was yesterday. But can we infer that he will make any such change, of which he has given no intimation? Can we safely base our action upon any such vague inference? Now, as ever, I wish not to misinterpret Judge Douglas's position, despite his motives or do aught that can be offensive to him. If ever we can come together on principle, our great cause may have assistance from his great ability. I hope to have interposed no advantageous obstacle. But clearly, he is not now with us. He does not pretend to be. He does not promise to ever be. Our cause, then, must be entrusted to those whose hands are free, who do care for the result. 2 years ago, the Republicans of the nation mustered over 1,300,000 strong. We did this under the single impulse of resistance to a common danger. with every external circumstance against us. We gathered from the four winds and formed and fought the battle through under the constant hot fire of a disciplined enemy. Did we brave all then to falter now? We shall not fail. If we stand firm, we shall not fail. Wise counsels may accelerate or mistakes delay it, but sooner or later, the victory is sure to come.
Great, thank you, House of Lewis. Next we have the House of Susan B. Anthony, and on deck we have the House of David Thorne Hopper. Thank you.
Good evening, and welcome to the Regent Hotel for the Turning Point charity event. My name is Julia Samuel, and I'm a pediatric counsellor and psychotherapist at St. Mary's Hospital here in London, and the godmother of our beloved speaker's grandson, Prince George of Cambridge. During her time with the royal family, Princess Diana has revolutionized social customs of the British monarchy. Despite troubles in her marriage, Princess Diana has been able to separate her humanitarian efforts from her home life, continuing her ardent advocacy for the ostracized, the sick, and the forgotten. Through her efforts, she has reconciled the gap between the royal family and the rest of the world. She's become an outspoken advocate for the humanization of those living with stigmatized conditions, such as drug addiction, homelessness, and AIDS or HIV. Her patronage triumphs over the prevalent fears of those who have been disenfranchised or cast out by the elite. Princess Diana's hand was the first to hold that of a gentleman AIDS patient, the first of the royal family to shake his hand without a glove. Her name graces many charities and institutions, including the host of today's event, Turning Point. Turning Point is a charity that focuses on helping those who struggle with mental illness and addiction outside of a traditional mental institution. Having experienced an eating disorder herself, Princess Diana found Turning Point to be one of her favorite charities. Please join me, friends, in welcoming my personal friend, Her Royal Highness, Diana, Princess of Wales. For many people in our society, the idea of talking with someone who has been in care, whether it be a juvenile offender, a person who has suffered from mental illness, or perhaps someone with learning difficulties, is too awful to contemplate. I can assure them it's not so bad. Not one of those I've ever met hurt me, was rude to me, or treated me as though I was mad. We now recognize that many of those who were put into long-stay institutions may never have been put there in the first place. One woman I vividly remember meeting had been put away 30 years ago, suffering from postnatal psychosis after the birth of her first child. Yet if the right support and resources had been available to her, she could so easily have continued to live in the community. Continued to enjoy what we all take for granted, being able to go to bed when one was tired, not when the shift changed, eating what she wanted, rather than being given food which offended the fewest taste buds, being able to be private when she needed to be, rather than having to share a room with 4 other people. No space, no privacy, no life. Care in the community has made all the difference to this woman's life. She is now being helped to return to the community she left so long ago. Living in a homely environment with a small number of others, she is relearning the skills which had been lost to her, savoring again the delights of a life she could barely remember. Recently, a great deal of publicity has been given to a tiny number of people who damage themselves or others when they return to the community from hospital care. It has raised very real concerns in many people. It's true,
There is a small minority who is rightly seen as a potential danger to the community, who need greater levels of care and understanding. But, however terrible these tragic cases are, they cannot be used as a way of dismissing the needs of thousands of others who are no threat to the community whatsoever. But again, the circle of ignorance, fear, and prejudice spins to condemn, casting them in the role of the untouchables, the people to be avoided at all costs, disabling them for being different, denying them the God-given right to be included, to be part of their community, denying them their right to live without fear of ridicule, hate, and exclusion. Finding the right kind of care in the community for each individual can never be seen as the soft option, nor is it cheap. It requires the specialist skills of many different experts and organizations, a partnership between doctors, health, and local authorities, the voluntary and private sector, and the police, all working together. Sharing their resources and undeniable talents to create an environment which a person can develop and grow. But it's also a partnership between these dedicated carers and the person being cared for. However, being asked to help decide what is best for themselves can leave the individual overwhelmed and frightened. Building on the work of citizen advocates who defend the rights of people with learning difficulties, perhaps we could also learn from the help being given to people with AIDS. Very early on, it was realized that they needed a very special kind of support, a very personal kind of attention to help them face the difficulties. Family and friends were sometimes too close to the problems to be able to really see what was needed, while the experts didn't always have the time to see beyond the symptoms. What was needed was an ally, a buddy, to give them one-to-one attention, someone who could listen and be there for them. Being a buddy is not easy, but from those I've met, the exchange of basic human kindness enriched not just the person being helped, but also the person who did the helping. By sharing the successes and the disappointments, a buddy could really make a difference to the lives of those taking their first steps back into the community. Wherever I go, I'm privileged to meet so many people who are trying in so many different ways to improve the quality of all of our lives. Volunteers and professionals, individuals and groups, from the old to the very young, all bringing people together. All attempting to build, in whatever way they can, a happier community, a better society, and a healthier nation. But despite the remarkable work they are doing, there still seems to be a deep concern that something is missing in our society today. A real belief that the community cares. There seems to be a growing feeling of discontent, of emptiness in many people's lives, while an overwhelming sense of loss and isolation undermines their efforts to survive and cope with the complexities of modern life. They know something crucial is lacking. Deep within us all is the need to care and be cared for. We all have that right, yet many people, in their attempt to build a life for themselves, lose touch with their own sense of belonging, of being part of something greater than themselves. They no longer believe they have the time or energy to give back to the community they live in by helping those around them to build a happier life. Yet, a community can only develop when individuals remember how dependent we all are on one another and reach out to those around them. Yet, we continue to hear how people who live in the same street don't even acknowledge their neighbors' existence, let alone stop to say hello. A community is made up of individuals. Everyone has their part to play in building a caring community. Virtually everyone at some point in their lives will need to be cared for by that community. The community is us. If it's denied the nourishment it needs for survival, it will fail to flourish. A plant without water will die, and so too will the spirit of our community. Care in the community is a partnership between skilled and caring professionals and a concerned and caring community. Working together to find new ways of helping these people who've been excluded and connecting them with neighbors who will understand and accept them. By providing proper funding for the homes they will need and the support they so rightly deserve, we can show them how much we care. Every single one of us needs to demonstrate how much we care for our community, care for each other, and in the process, care for ourselves. Perhaps we're too embarrassed to change, too frightened of the consequences of showing that we care. But why not risk it anyway? Begin today. Carry out a random act of seemingly senseless kindness, with no expectation of reward or punishment, safe in the knowledge that one day, someone, somewhere, might do the same for you.
Thank you, SBA. Next, we have the House of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and on deck we'll have the House of Sojourner Truth.
Hello, everyone. Today, on April 12th, 1999, at the 7th Millennium Evening, graciously hosted by President Clinton, I, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I have the honor to introduce an extraordinary man. The survivor of the Holocaust and the human rights advocate is, in the full meaning of the word, a spark of light in this world. The man that is about to speak shows complete dedication to doing good, and thus fulfilling God's commandment to serve the outcasts of society. This speaker showcases with his life the fight against what I believe is to be of vast importance, yet seldom spoken about: the injustice of indifference. If we do not do something which we ought to do, we have done wrong. It is not evil people that we should hold responsible for the evil in the world. It is indifferent good people. They are the reason for the world's suffering today. Merely waiting and looking on is not moral. Instead, we should act. And this man, who has so much to teach, fully embraces this holy and noble mission. The speaker you are about to hear exemplifies everything opposed to the lukewarm. Hear me when I say this. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. In action, we find justice. And in justice, we find reconciliation. And allow me to speak as a Christian here. There is no higher calling than to reconcile oneself to God and to one another. The speaker I'm introducing exemplifies this kind of altruism. Listen to him, and you will learn much, that indifference is injustice, and that justice comes with action. Therefore, act justly in order to reconcile men with one another as peacemakers. This man I have something in common with. We both were victims of the world's most tragic crimes against humanity. He made it out, I could not. He now uses his platform to advocate for the rights of men made in the image of God. And for that, I thank God endlessly. Now I leave the podium to a servant of God, Eli Lisa. Hear him and be reconciled. Thank you.
Mr. President, Mrs. Clinton, members of Congress, Excellencies, friends, 54 years ago, to the day, a young Jewish boy from a small town in the Carpathian Mountains woke up in a place of eternal infamy called Buchenwald. He was finally free, but there was no joy in his heart. He thought there never would be again. Liberated a day earlier by American soldiers, he remembers their rage at what they saw. And even if he lives to be a very old man, he will be grateful for them for that rage, for their compassion. Though he did not understand their language, their eyes told him what he needed to know, that they too would remember and bear witness. And now, I stand before you, and I'm filled with a profound and abiding gratitude to the American people. Gratitude is a word that I cherish. Gratitude is what defines the humanity of the human being. And I'm grateful to you, Ms. Clinton, for what you are doing for children in the world, for the homeless, for the victims of injustice, the victims of destiny and society. And I thank all of you for being here. We are on the threshold of a new century, a new millennium. What will the legacy of this vanishing century be? How will it be remembered in the new millennium? Surely it will be judged severely in both moral and metaphysical terms. These failures have cast a dark shadow over humanity. World wars, civil wars, the senseless chain of assassinations, Gandhi, the Kennedys, Martin Luther King, the inhumanity in the Gulag, and the tragedy of Hiroshima. And on a different level, of course, Auschwitz and Treblinka. So much violence, so much indifference. What is indifference? A strange and unnatural state in which the lines blur between light and darkness, cruelty and compassion, good and evil. What are its inescapable consequences? Is it a philosophy? Is there a philosophy of indifference conceivable? Is it necessary at times to practice it simply to keep one's sanity, live normally, enjoy a fine meal and a glass of wine as the world around us experiences harrowing upheavals? Of course, indifference can be tempting. More than that, seductive. It is so much easier to look away from victims. It is awkward, troublesome to be involved in another person's pain and despair. For the person who is indifferent, his or her neighbor are of no consequence. Their lives are meaningless. Indifference reduces the other to an abstraction. Rooted in our tradition, some of us felt that to be abandoned by humanity then was not the ultimate. We felt that to be abandoned by God was a harsher punishment than to be a victim of his anger. Man can live far from God, not outside God. God is wherever we are, even in suffering. During the darkest times, inside the ghettos and death camps, we felt abandoned, forgotten. Indifference, after all, is more dangerous than anger or hatred. Anger can sometimes be creative. One writes a great poem, a great symphony. One does something for the sake of humanity because one is angry at the injustice that one witnesses, but indifference is never creative. Indifference is not the beginning, it is an end. Indifference is always the friend of the enemy, for it benefits the aggressor, never his victim, whose pain is magnified when he or she feels forgotten. Our only miserable consolation was that we believed that Auschwitz and Treblinka were closely guarded secrets, that the leaders of the free world did not know what was going on behind those black gates and barbed wires, that they had no knowledge of the war against the Jews. If they knew, we thought, surely those leaders would have moved heaven and earth to intervene. They would have spoken out with great outrage and conviction. They would have bombed the railways leading to Birkenau, just the railways, just once. And now we learned that the Pentagon knew, the State Department knew. The depressing tale of St. Louis is a case in point. 60 years ago, its human cargo, nearly 1,000 Jews, was turned back to Nazi Germany. And that happened after the Kristallnacht, with hundreds of Jews' shops destroyed, synagogues burned, thousands of people put in concentration camps. And that ship, which was already in the shores of the United States, was sent back. I don't understand. Roosevelt was a good man with a heart. He understood those who needed help. Why didn't he allow these refugees to disembark? 1,000 people in America, the greatest democracy, the most generous of all new nations in modern history. What happened? I don't understand. Why the indifference on the highest level to the suffering of the victims? But then there were human beings who were sensitive to our tragedy. Those non-Jews, those Christians that we call righteous Gentiles, whose selfless acts of heroism saved the honor of their faith. Why were they so few? Why did some of America's largest corporations continue to do business with Hitler's Germany until 1942? How is one to explain their indifference? And yet, my friends, good things have also happened in this dramatic century. The defeat of Nazism, the collapse of communism, the rebirth of Israel on its ancestral soil. And then, of course, the joint decision of the United States and NATO to intervene in Kosovo and save those victims who were uprooted by a man whom I believe should be charged with crimes against humanity. This time, the world was not silent. This time, we do respond. This time, we intervene. Does it mean that we have learned from the past? Does it mean that society has changed? Has the human being become less indifferent and more human? Are we less insensitive to the plight of the victims of ethnic cleansing and other forms of injustices? Is today's intervention in Kosovo a lasting warning that never again will the terrorization of children and their parents be allowed in the world? What about the children? Oh, we see them on television. We read about them in the papers, and we do so with a broken heart. We see their faces, their eyes. Do we hear their pleas? Do we feel their pain, their agony? Once again, I think of the young Jewish boy from the Caucasian mountains. He has accompanied the old man I have become throughout these years of quest and struggle. And together, we walk towards the new millennium, carried by profound fear and extraordinary hope.
A reminder, once again, to all of you who are attending, if you're attending in person in the city room or in a war room, be sure to grab either your house liaison or a member of the committee after this event concludes to get your credit. And if you're attending via Zoom, go ahead and fill out the Google form that we sent out in the chat when the event is over. And next we have our final speech by the House of the Journalist Group. Thank you.
Welcome to the 368th commencement exercises at Harvard University. My name is Margaret Wong, and as the Vice President of the Harvard Alumni Association, I am privileged to introduce our commencement speaker, the first female German Chancellor, Angela Merkel. Chancellor Merkel brings to the class of 2019 her first-hand understanding of transition, resiliency, and reconciliation. Growing up in East Berlin with the confines of the Berlin Wall, Chancellor Merkel witnessed the difficulty of unification once the wall came down. After working as a research scientist, she entered politics and became a delegate for the first democratic East German government, which sought out the unification and reconciliation between the East and the West. In her 14 years as Chancellor, she has consistently pursued the good of all of Germany and has worked to maintain and repair foreign relations as well. Chancellor Merkel was re-elected for a fourth term in 2018, a testament to the success of her efforts and the adoration of her citizens. As the graduates face a divided world, Chancellor Merkel's wisdom is an opportunity to learn from someone who has faced political and social polarization and has decided to move forward with purpose and charity. Without further ado, I welcome German Chancellor Angela Merkel to the stage.
Thank you. President Bachmann, fellows of the corporation, members of the board of overseers, members of the alumni board, members of the faculty, proud parents, and graduates. Today is a day of joy. Today is your day. Many congratulations. I am delighted to be here today and would like to tell you about some of my own experiences. This ceremony marks the end of an intensive and probably also hard chapter in your lives. The German writer Hermann Hesse had some wonderful words for such a situation in life. Hermann Hesse wrote, "In all beginnings dwells a magic force for guarding us and helping us to live." These words by Hermann Hesse inspired me when I completed my physics degree at the age of 24. That was back in the year of 1978. The world was divided into East and West. It was the time of the Cold War. I grew up in East Germany, in the GDR, at a time when that part of my homeland was not free, in a dictatorship. People were oppressed and monitored by the state. Political opponents were persecuted. The government of the GDR was afraid that the people would run away to freedom. And that's why the Berlin Wall was built. It was made of concrete and steel. Anyone who was discovered trying to overcome it was arrested and shot. This wall in the middle of Berlin divided a people. and it divided families. My family too was divided. My first job after graduation was as a physicist in East Berlin at the Academy of Sciences. I lived near the Berlin Wall. On the way home from my institute, I walked past it every day. Behind it lay West Berlin, freedom. And every day, when I was very close to the wall, I had to turn away at the last moment and head towards my apartment. Every day, I had to turn away from freedom at the last minute. I don't know how many times I thought I couldn't stand it anymore. It was really frustrating. I was not a dissident. I did not run up and bang against the wall. But neither did I deny its existence, because I did not want to lie to myself. The Berlin Wall limited my options. It literally stood in my way. But there was one thing this wall could not do in all these years. It could not impose limits on my own inner thoughts, my personality, my imagination, my desires. These could not be limited by prohibitions and coercion. Then came the year 1989. Throughout Europe, the shared will for freedom unleashed incredible forces. Hundreds and thousands dared to take to the streets in Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and also in the GDR. The people demonstrated and brought down the wall. What many people had not thought possible, myself included, became reality. Where once there had been a dark wall, a door suddenly opened. The moment had come for me too, to step through the door. I did not have to turn away from freedom at the last minute any longer. I could cross that border and venture out into the great wide open. During those months, 30 years ago, I personally experienced that nothing has to remain as it is. What seems fixed and unchanging can in fact change. And in matters both large and small, every change begins in the mind. That generation of my parents had to learn this very painfully. My father and my mother were born in 1926 and 1928, when they were as old as most of you here today. The fracture of civilization that was the Holocaust and the Second World War had just ended. My country, Germany, had brought unimaginable suffering upon Europe and the world. How likely would it have been for the victors and the vanquished to remain irreconcilable for many years? But instead, Europe overcame centuries of conflict. The result was a peaceful order based on common values rather than supposed national strength. Despite all the discussions and temporary setbacks, I am firmly convinced that we Europeans have united for the better. And the relationship between Germans and Americans shows how former enemies in war can become friends. Dear Harvard class of 2019, your generation will face the challenges of the 21st century. In these coming decades, you are among those who will lead us into the future. But what, dear graduates, could prevent you? What could hinder us from doing that? Again, there are walls in our minds of ignorance and narrow-mindedness. They exist between members of a family as well as between social groups. I would like us to tear down these walls that repeatedly prevent us from communicating about the world in which we want to live together. Whether we succeed is up to us. Therefore, dear graduates, take nothing for granted. Our individual freedoms are not self-evident. Democracy is not self-evident. Neither is peace nor prosperity. But if we tear down the walls that restrict us, if we open the door and embrace new beginnings,
then anything is possible. Walls can collapse. Let us surprise ourselves with what is possible. Let us surprise ourselves with what we can do. In my own life, it was the fall of the Berlin Wall that allowed me to step out into the open almost 30 years ago. We all knew of what lay behind us, but not what might lie ahead. The moment you stand in the open is also a moment of risk. Letting go of the old is part of a new beginning. There is no beginning without an end. No day without night, no life without death. Our whole life consists of this difference, the space between the beginning and the ending. What's in between we call life and experience. I believe that we must always be prepared to end things in order to feel the magic of beginnings and to make the most of our opportunities. That was my experience in college, in science, and it's what I have experienced in politics. And who knows what's in store for me after life as a politician? It is completely open. Only one thing is clear. It will again be something different and something new. That's why I want to leave this wish with you. Tear down walls of ignorance and narrow-mindedness, for nothing has to stay as it is. Don't forget that freedom is never something that can be taken for granted. Surprise yourself with what is possible. Remember that openness always involves risks. Letting go of the old is part of the new beginning, and above all, nothing can be taken for granted. Everything is possible. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Make sure you get credit, you know how. One last housekeeping item is just those who are in war rooms right now, or who are on campus anywhere, just make sure that you tidy up your war room before you leave. Please don't leave out any food. That would be gross. So we just correct yourselves. And then thank you to everyone who performed. You guys are amazing. And thank you to our judges. We'll see you tomorrow.